The U.S. federal government should adopt a carbon tax.
What?
Please, just don't be a loser, and learn how to be intelligent from our very own Ryley Goulet.
I'm Ryley Goulet. This is my 5-step plan on how to do research and not suck at debate. Step 1. What you're going to want to do is deconstruct every single word in the topic, because you don't want to start debating unless you understand what each of these words mean and what you should be debating about. So let's take a closer look at this topic right here. We're going to first look at the word US. It tells us a couple of different things. One, it's not foreign. It's domestic. It's about the US. So you don't want to be talking about countries like Switzerland. Then we're going to look at federal government. That tells us something very specific, that the actor is the federal government, because that's important. Who's acting in the resolution is important to decide whether or not those actions are doable or whether or not those actions are a good or bad thing. And then we're going to look about what the actor is doing, adopting a carbon tax. That's really where the bulk of your arguments are going to come from, because that's the action. We're deciding whether or not the action that the actor is taking is a good or a bad thing. That's what you do in public forum debate, is you decide from a policy standpoint whether or not the federal government should adopt a carbon tax within the U.S. Step 2, we're going to truly figure out what it is that we're talking about when we mean carbon tax. Is it something that the government is taxing? Well, obviously, because that's what the resolution says. But we have to understand what a carbon tax means, and that only comes with research, not from the briefs.
Alright, so when we look at this topic altogether, we see that a huge component of it is these two words right here, carbon tax. So what we should do is first know what a carbon tax really is, just get some background information on the topic itself to see where the controversy that created this topic in the first place actually lies. So we can do that by searching up carbon tax itself. So when we look at this article, we see that it gives you a very good definition of what a carbon tax is, which is essentially a tax based on greenhouse gas emissions. And essentially the purpose of this is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, this article goes on to further that even though it has positive intentions, it does negatively affect some other individuals, either through outsourcing or other methods. So we can see that through this article, we're able to see where the controversy lies, and by knowing this background information about carbon taxes itself, we're able to actually argue this topic, and we're actually able to understand this topic.
Step 3, you're going to go on news sites and look for overall arguments that are going to help you develop specific positions and ultimately construct a case in the end. You're going to go on news sites like CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, Brookings Institute, Reuters, The Atlantic, maybe even think tanks like the Cato Institute, the Rand Corporation, or Think Progress. But probably the best areas to go to would be universities, because they publish studies too from the professors. That's why they have professors there. They do research. Universities like Harvard, Brown, Stanford, Duke, and Princeton. These sites are going to make arguments, and those arguments are advantageous to you as a debater because they're the same arguments that you're going to want to make when it comes to writing a debate case.
Alright, so now what we're going to do is go through news articles such as New York Times, and when we go through these articles, we're going to look for specific arguments that either fall on the pro side or the con side of these resolutions. So in this particular article, we can see that the bulk of it talks about how essentially a carbon tax de-incentivizes processes that basically emit greenhouse gases. That in turn allows for the more of a usage of renewable energies, which in turn helps our environment. So as we go through, we see that this is essentially what it talks about, and this is clearly an argument that falls on the affirmative side. So why a carbon tax would be essentially beneficial towards the US. Alright, so the last thing we're going to look at today is this PDF from the Congressional Budget Office. Right off the bat, what you're going to see is it's 25 pages long. Now, you don't want to go through each and every of these 25 pages. So when you come along a PDF like this, first thing you should do is look at the abstract. Now, by reading the abstract, you can see if this article is what you're looking for or not. So as we look through this, we can see that it talks about carbon leakage, which is an argument for the negative. Now that we know that it actually does have information that's useful for us, we can start scrolling through. Now, you don't even want to scroll through for it. What you want to do instead is either use a table of contents, or what you do is use Control F and you look for what you're interested in. For me, it would be carbon leakage. And I sift through and I look at what might interest me. So we can see where carbon leakage occurs and to what intensity it is. And we could basically quantify that carbon leakage actually happens.
Oh.
Step 4, you're going to look into more specific arguments. Arguments that are going to help you analyze and delve deeper into why you're going to be voting or at least arguing for certain things. These are things that are related to the topic and why a carbon tax might be good, but it's more specific than that. You're going to look for statistics. You're going to look for authors who've published research pertaining to why it's a good idea to do the things that you talk about in your case.
Alright, so last thing you're going to do now is actually go into each of these arguments that you found. So previously we looked at this article or PDF about carbon leakage. Now let's go a bit more in depth about it. So looking through this research, we've found this statistic that basically says that carbon imports from non-committed countries increased by about 8%. So we see that this essentially quantifies carbon leakage for us. We see that the emission intensity of their imports increased by about 3%. So we see that these are huge statistics that work in the favor of the negative. And by just broadly going through the argument at a surface level, we aren't able to find it. So what you need to do is go to Google, search up these PDFs specifically about carbon leakage, and look for these pieces of information that are extremely vital to your case. These are essentially what are going to help you win a debate.
Step 5, you're going to learn how to make a card. Nothing like a birthday card or anything like that, but a card that's going to go into your case and help you win rounds.
Alright, so last thing you want to do now is make a card. So once you have the research, you want to condense it to the point where you can just scroll through all of your research and access it really easily. So what you do is make a card. So in these cards, you want to include specifically graphs or paragraphs of information, statistics that are really vital to your argument. Now, on top of those items, what you want to have is the author, as well as the date, and also where the information was obtained from, the source. And once you have that, you essentially have a card. So now let's look at making one ourselves. So going back to this New York Times article, we can see right here, there's basically this argument here that says that by having this carbon tax, it would reduce total greenhouse gas emissions in the US by 26 to 28% in 20 years. So we see that this is pretty substantial statistics. So what we want to do is copy and paste it. Now, I don't want to just copy and paste this one paragraph. I want some context. Because if you see here at the beginning, it mentions they. We don't really know what they is. So let's just go up and read a bit more, and let's start from here. That way we get a good amount of context, and we're also able to have basically a shortened version of the article itself. So now let's go to our document, copy and paste. We have this. Now that we have the information, we want to put the article author, as well as the source, and finally the date. So there you go. That's a card right there.
Now that you've learned my infallible 5-step method, you might not suck at debate anymore. You could though, but I hope that you do a lot better and that this video's helped you in the end.